Good afternoon, good evening, good night, good morning, wherever you are, however you are, whatever time it is. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have got an awesome show lined up for you today. However, I do have to say the intro was a wee bit wrong there. I am usually in Seville, and Seville is my base, is my home, is where my life now is. However, this morning my wife woke up and said to me, "Hey Harry, let's go to Portugal today because why not? You know, it's the Easter holidays, the kids not at school." So we did, and we've found a ridiculously cheap apartment, which when we got to, we realised was home to all of the teenagers in the entire world. But it's lovely. We've got a nice view of the beach, so I can sit here and look outside while I speak to you, wonderful people, all about TikTok teaching and the like. So, how has your week been? It has been exactly 1 week since we last spoke, since I was last here, and it for me has been. It has been a roller coaster of a week. So you may or may not remember that last week I was discussing uh, issues with a certain project. Well, that is no longer a project that I am working on, which is pretty sad um, because I thought that it was the project of my dreams. Um, but at the end of the day, not every project can be the project of your dreams, and it was. Well, it wasn't a nightmare. That would be an exaggeration. The editorial team were absolutely wonderful. The other authors on the project were fantastic, but I just couldn't get my head around the fundamental differences in the way we looked at sustainability in general. And for me, it was a fairly important factor that we could get over that and get through that and be able to continue. But in the end, we couldn't. So it is the first time I have ever left a project. So it leaves me feeling somewhat dismayed. I have to say. I know that I was losing an awful lot of sleep over it. I literally was losing a lot of sleep over it. That I couldn't get to sleep, and then I was waking up early to continue the writing and the rewriting. And so in the end, we go through rewrite after rewrite of the first draft. So before it even gone to an editor, there was, two or three different rewrites, and it just became too much. And while the pay after negotiating was pretty good, I just couldn't take it anymore. It was destroying me. I was not in a good mood. The writing was not fantastic, so it was a tricky one and it was a tough decision, but in the end, I did have to make the decision. And for the first time ever, I left the project. But thankfully, all of my marigolds across the internet have been here to support me and to back me up and to tell me that you know what, sometimes you just have to do that thing. Anyway, today we have a wonderful, wonderful interview with Annie Brugenschmidt, and it's coming up very shortly, where we talk all about microlearning and TikTok teaching. So I don't know if you've seen Inglés with Annie, if you've had a look at that over on TikTok, also on Instagram, and seen her unique take on how to teach chunks of English, to take little parts of English and make them digestible for, in this case, a Spanish speaking learner. So, you know, she mentions that a lot of her listeners come in from the US and so on and so forth. So it's a Spanish speaker, but this Spanish speaker can be from any part of the world, of course. And she does have her unique take on how she managed to go from zero to 80,000 followers in just under 6 months. And I think the key to it, as always, is the fact that she is herself, and she has a wonderful self. So we will very shortly be speaking to Annie. In the meantime, hold on to your hats, and we've got the news for you.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncatbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
In union news, Daniel Kebede has been elected leader of the National Education Union. The union is the largest teachers' union and has been at the forefront of industrial action over teachers' pay in recent months. Mr. Kebede said in a statement, after taking 69% of the vote to win the election, "I am honoured to have been elected as General Secretary. I would like to thank everyone who has supported and campaigned for me." He went on to talk about the need for fundamental change in education, and that this included an end to real terms pay cuts, an end to massive overwork of staff, the end of punitive Ofsteds, and an increase in school funding. He also thanked current Joint General Secretaries Kevin Courtney and Dr. Mary Bousted for their inspiring leadership over the last 6 years. They will step down at the end of August. The BBC reports that, according to a leaked government document, almost a quarter of teachers in England are working 12-hour days, with around 60% of teachers saying they were doing 60 hours a week or more. The research by the Department for Education was carried out during spring 2022, but the findings have not been officially made public. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan has said that a new task force will be created to help reduce teachers' workload by an average of 5 hours per week. The leak comes as teaching unions consult members in England on a new pay offer, which includes the promise to reduce workload. The leaked document, marked confidential and given the title Working Lives of Teachers and Leaders, was produced by the DfE to examine issues around teacher supply, recruitment and retention. More than 11,000 teachers and leaders across primary and secondary were questioned. The report found 1 in 4 teachers were considering leaving the state sector within the next 12 months. Workload was the key factor in this decision. 3/4 said they spent too much time on paperwork. 2/3 of leaders said they spent too much time responding to government policy changes. 1 in 5 said they had low satisfaction in their working life, whilst almost a half rated their anxiety levels as high. Almost 3/4 of teachers described their workload as unacceptable. Dr. Mary Bousted of the NEU accused ministers of withholding important information from the peer review body, although the government denied this. A spokesperson for the government insisted that the recent pay offer of 4.3% plus a £1,000 one-off payment was fair and reasonable. The Department for Education has released an update on the .gov.uk website focusing on the review of the way relationship, sex and health education is delivered. The update comes after a number of stories across media outlets prompted concern and outrage from some quarters and claims that hysteria is being whipped up by right-wing agitators from others. RSHE education has been compulsory for pupils in primary schools since September 2020. In secondary schools, relationships and sex education must be taught. The review, which will be completed by an expert panel, will focus on how to ensure pupils have access to age-appropriate information and how to place protection from pupils being introduced to things that they are too young to understand properly. The panel will also consider how age ratings can be introduced for different parts of the curriculum. The review will be completed before the end of 2023. As we approach Easter, the debate about supporting families who receive support through free school meals should be supported in holiday times, and it's opened up again. The big issue raises concerns that despite the cost of living crisis, many families will go without support until term begins again. In what it calls a postcode lottery for support, many families will miss out as current funding largely depends on where you live. In England, the government is not directly funding free school meals over the Easter break, but support may be available if local councils decide to provide meals or vouchers. Many councils are relying on the Holiday Activities and Food Programme to support low-income families. In Scotland, some councils are offering free school meals payments to low-income families, but universal free school meals for children in primary 1 to 5 will not be available. There is some support available, but it varies by council, as does the amount of support being offered. The Welsh Government has made free meals available throughout the holiday period. The government in Wales announced that £9 million has been provided to support eligible pupils with a free meal up to the end of May half-term, including all bank holidays. The support will take the form of meal vouchers, money, or packed lunches. In Northern Ireland, no free school meal provision is available. The previous holiday hunger payments of £27 per fortnight ceased on April the 1st. A Department for Education spokesperson said it was because additional ring-fenced funding had ended, but campaigners focusing on food poverty said the decision was abhorrent. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Live from Seville.
And we are back. Thank you very much for hanging in there. It was that was Joe. We did not have the 2-minute tech today, but I'm sure it will be back very soon, hopefully by next week, of course. So how have you been? I hope you've been well. I'm going to jump straight in here with the interview with Annie Brugenschmidt. She spoke to me the other day. She's actually working at this very moment. So again, this is not a live interview, but any questions you do have, please do drop them in the chat. Or, of course, if you're listening back afterwards, let us know. And, of course, you can send us a message or get in touch with Annie herself directly. She gives her message at the end and tells us how we can get hold of her. And obviously, if you're listening on any podcast provider, please do leave a review and say just how 5-star wonderful we really are. So without further ado, here is our interview with Annie. As I say, any questions, just drop them in the chat. So welcome, Annie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you, Harry. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very happy to be here.
Not as happy as I am. I'm happier than you, I promise.
I don't know. We could have a debate on that one, but we'll see.
We could. Maybe we could have, some kind of discussion towards the end of who is the happier to have the who on the where. Anyway, that's kind of beside the point. So, Annie, it's lovely to have you here, as I've said. Now, as I do with everybody, every guest I ever have on, I want to know more about them and their journey in ELT. So basically, where did you come from and how did you get to where you are today? Take as long as you like.
Wow, yes, a big question, but definitely a fair question. I'm from the United States. I'm from Indiana. Do you happen to know much about Indiana?
Not a lot. I know that it's got a person named after it whose surname is Jones, and one of my good friends is called Indiana. And
there you go.
It has a car race.
Yes, that's true as well. The Indy 500. Yeah.
There you go.
Sadly, I've never been to it. I was going to go potentially right before COVID hit. I was talking with my friends about, we live in Indiana. We should go to the Indy 500. And then we didn't have the chance. But that's probably the main thing that's known, I would say, from the area, from the state. So I'm an Indiana Hoosier. I grew up there my whole life, really like in central Indiana. And fast forward to, let's say to high school. I was in Spanish classes, really enjoyed my Spanish classes. And at some point in high school, probably toward the end, I decided I wanted to get into education. So I decided to study elementary education at Indiana University. So that was my major, studied elementary education. And I also was getting a minor in Spanish. I'm sure you've heard the word minor. I don't know if they use that in England though, right?
They don't. No, they don't. But yeah, I get the system. You have like the major, which is the big one, and the minor, which is not quite as big.
Exactly. So yeah, I had quite a lot of course, elementary education focused classes, and then some that were focused specifically on Spanish. A couple of linguistics classes too, which I totally nerded out in those classes. I loved those so much, and just the Spanish in general. And at some point, when I was studying in college, it was probably about 2 years in, I decided to get a what we called there an ENL license. It seems like that term is not used quite so much over here, ENL, English as a New Language.
I've literally never heard it, ever.
No, Yeah, that was the literally the title of the license, ENL. But then I, of course, through my classes there, and since then I've heard ESL, second language, and then you were using the term ELT, which I heard, of course, more during the TESOL conference to ELT, which I hadn't been exposed to so much until then. But there are a bunch of terms for it.
Oh, there are so many. We've got so
Yeah.
many TLAs, I like to call them, 3-letter abbreviations for everything in ELT or,
Yes.
EAT or all of them. We've got them all. We've got every TLA.
Exactly, everything. Yeah. But I really enjoyed those classes as well. I think technically one of the linguistics classes that I took at that time was because of the ENL license, and found that super interesting. Found all of my theory classes really interesting too in ENL. And I'm not sure, again, so much of this is required throughout Europe and in England too, but we in the United States, we for our last semester in education, we always do our student teaching semester. So I also did my student teaching semester, which was half, focused on a general education kindergarten classroom, and then half of it was focused in the ELT realm. So I worked with really smaller groups of students who were, well, I think the term non-native speakers could be debatable. But some of them were, let's say, English learners. That's another three-letter term, ELL, English language learners.
There you go.
Yeah. So at that time, I worked with some students who were English language learners of various levels, and most of them were in third and fourth grade, and I found that to be a really awesome experience, in part because it was super interesting. It involved such a let's say mix of languages and backgrounds. During that time, I feel like I was able to learn a lot, and especially felt like I was able to learn a lot because of coming from central Indiana, which, especially that area of Indiana, we don't necessarily have much of a mix of cultures per se.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, of course, some, but not a lot, and not much of a mix of languages either.
I know what
So
you
I had my
mean. I live in like rural Andalusia, so there's like diversity is not the key word here, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And you could definitely say that about, the specific area that I came from. So it was really interesting because I knew that I was interested in Spanish and in languages and linguistics. That was all super interesting to me, but it had basically all been in a classroom environment. So of course, in that sense, it's a bit, you could say, structured, not so authentic. I mean, yes, in some ways authentic. And I know that, of course, teachers in any of those contexts, they try to make it as authentic as possible. But it was cool to be able to get that real experience, real field experience at that time. That was in the fall of 2020, fall semester of 2020. And then it was also during that time that I was looking into possibly moving to Spain, because I guess something I skipped over is I had previously studied in Alcalá de Henares. I'm sure.
Oh yeah, just outside Madrid.
Exactly. So that was in 2018, but that was just a month. I was studying. I was living with a host family just for a month. It was also, it got me some Spanish credits, which was great. And I expected to really enjoy that, but I definitely, I mean, it's the cliche, everybody says it, but I enjoyed it more than I even expected. And I got really lucky with my host family. They were so nice. I mean, my Spanish at that time was a little rough, to say the
Classroom
least.
Spanish, let's call it that. It's when you don't have real exposure to a language, it becomes very kind of stagnated and like classroomy. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. And that was definitely me at the time. But like I said, my host family was super nice, super welcoming, included me in a bunch of different activities and had a lot of patience for my Spanish, which was so important for me. I mean, I still remember getting like so nervous and anxious about trying to have like a real conversation with them in Spanish during that time, but I definitely improved during that. But then it left me with the feeling of, okay, I'm not finished. with my Spanish here. Like there's so much more that I want to learn and improve on. And I loved being in Spain. Of course, living in a suburb it felt, like a very authentic experience to me, and I loved that. And then at the same time, I was looking into options in Madrid as I was about to graduate, just because I had visited Madrid being so close when I was in Alcalá de Henares. Really enjoyed Madrid, thought I wanted, to try out the city life per se, because I'm not from a city and had never lived in a city before coming to Madrid. And then I found the Aux world, the auxiliar world per se, language assistant world. So I applied for a position as a language assistant, and that was again in the fall of 2020. Got accepted, and it was like, thank you very much. It was like this whole feeling of like, again, I guess like cliche, but it's like, can I actually do this? Like, yeah, I applied for this, awesome opportunity to live in Spain, but I was like, oh my gosh, like moving to Spain, like I've only lived in central Indiana, with people that I've known my whole life, speaking the language I know and that kind of thing. But then I was like, I talked to some people about it, talked to friends, talked to family, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. So, I made it official and like made my deposit and everything, and moved to Madrid then in January of 2021, which was during COVID.
It was indeed. That must have been super fun.
Yeah, that was interesting. It was really, I mean, I'll never forget that whole like period of time, because it was like so much stress at one time and so much excitement too. I mean, obviously everyone in the world was facing stress, and some, of course, more than I was. I mean, I recognize that. But I was like, okay, even though it's COVID is happening, I don't want to delay this. So I decided to do it. And some of the challenges, of course, were, I had to get my visa before even coming over to Madrid, which is not always the case, at least for people from the United States. So I had to make sure that I had that before I bought my flight. And then there was the whole PCR process. I needed to make sure that I got a PCR within 72 hours of the flight, but still got the results. We've
so much fun. So much fun.
Yeah. And it was like that, all of that on top of like moving to another country. I was like, oh my gosh, wow. Am I gonna make it? But no, and then the other layer was Filomena.
Yeah, of course, Filomena the storm that absolutely devastated Madrid a couple of years ago when it snowed in Madrid. Something that doesn't often happen if for our listeners. Yeah, so that must have made it even easier for you.
Yeah, exactly. And the snowstorm hit as all of us in my auxiliar program were literally on the way. So then I met a few people in my program in the airport, and we ended up getting stuck in Lisbon for 3 nights, which is not a bad place to get stuck, of course.
It could be worse.
Yeah, but it was quite a process. And then we finally made it, which was obviously great. And so at first here in Madrid, I was teaching at a public school. So there's a limit of 2 years being an aux. I'm sure that you would know that, but so I started that in 2021 in January, and then was an aux at the same public school until June of 2023 of 2022 of last year.
June 2023 hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, exactly.
We will get there. Don't worry. I hope.
Thank you for reminding me. Yeah. So I was there for a year and a half at that school. Which was great. It was an elementary school. I put in that preference because of, what I had studied, kind of as I explained, and I was with a mix of different ages, which was great. Again, I feel like I got super lucky with the school that I was at too, because all of the teachers were they were passionate and respectful of us as the language assistants, and they respected our time. They tried to not overuse us for our position and not underuse us for our position. Like they incorporated us very well, and it was so cool. I mean, for that whole period of time to actually be in a bilingual school. My school is called Asturias. It's in Vallecas, and it's called Asturias. And it was so cool to be there, like truly immersed in a bilingual school. Of course, my position was to be speaking English like the whole time. But a lot of the students, they might speak to each other in Spanish and things like that. And I always, like I said, I nerd out about linguistics, I nerd out about grammar, and any Spanish I can listen to and pick up. I was nerding out over that internally. I tried to hold to my position of speaking English.
Also, you've got the staff room as well. Like when I was working in a school, yes, my classes were 98% in English, but the classroom was the staff room was 100% Spanish. So it made it really improved my Spanish massively. And that reminds me that my daughter, she's 9, she's at school, and she has an auxiliar, and her name is Annie, but she's from Minnesota. She's from St. Paul, so she's not
really?
She's not from Indiana, I'm afraid. That would have been a really crazy coincidence. But
that would have been crazy, yeah. I mean, not too far off, at least like accent wise and that kind of thing. Yeah. So that's cool. That's super cool.
So what happened after June when you finished in the school? Where did you go then?
Yes. At that point, in June, I was really having like a what would you call it? Kind of not a midlife crisis, but a quarter life crisis. Yeah, panic.
A quarter life crisis? Does that exist?
I don't know. I think I've heard the term, but some kind of crisis, panic, whatever you want to call it. That was happening to me, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do and if I wanted to go back to the U.S. I had really been thinking about that. I mean, I was heavily considering it, but I was also thinking, I mean, I really, really love living in Madrid and everything language-wise and also culture-wise, but let's go with language-wise that's involved with living in Madrid. And I knew I would miss that a lot. So I don't know, I was having this crisis, but then I came across a job at an academy with adults. So right now I'm working at American Language Academy and I'm working with adults, which is, totally a shift, of course. I'm going with working with kids, working with adults is, it was a shift. And I don't know, I think I was, in a certain sense, I came across the job and I was almost like, I don't know, I was in the headspace of like, okay, I'm probably going back to the US. And then I was like, oh, okay, so this is happening. And it was a great opportunity. And I ended up going forward with it and doing what I needed to do over the summer to prepare and, get the documents going, that whole thing, that whole process. And started with them in September, this past September. So now I'm working with adults and I have group classes, like small group classes, usually between 2 people to 7 or 8 people on any given day. And it's been really great too, working there.
So that's your let's call that professional side of things. Not to say the other side of things isn't professional, because it is professional as well. But let's look a bit now towards the topic of this conversation. The microlearning and TikTok teaching. A nice bit of alliteration in there. I discovered you on Instagram, and spoke to you on Instagram. Watched some of your videos and was like, wow, they're cool. I've seen a lot of teacher videos online, like a lot. And some of them are really good. Some of them are videos on Instagram. But yours really stood out to me for a number of reasons. And we'll talk about those shortly. But then you said, actually, I'm more on TikTok, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot I'm old. I don't really look at TikTok very often. Although apparently there is one video of me on TikTok which does have 15,000 views. So
hey, there you go. Cool.
It's not 500,000, but it's not bad. It's not bad.
Hey, but no, that's pretty good. I'll have to check it out.
There you go. It's with Charlie's Lessons, by the way. He was actually my first ever guest, I believe. But anyway,
okay.
I digress. So I saw that and I was like, hey, this is cool. I want to learn more from you because of your cool videos. So you do this teaching on TikTok, and you help students with micro-learning. So what was it that made you think, I want to do that?
Good question. Okay, well, going back to what you said about developing professionally, I feel like I've been able to make my ideas about teaching and some of like the challenges of learning English, specifically as a Spanish speaker and all of that, I've been able to make those more concrete through working at the academy that I'm at now, which has been really great. And I also knew, I mean, really throughout my life that I enjoy making videos. I would not consider myself like an expert on video making or anything. I've never like studied that necessarily, but when I was younger with my friends, we always made these like stupid videos that we thought were hilarious, little movies and stuff like that.
They were
I
probably
always
hilarious.
loved, you never know. But I remember loving doing that. And then there have been different times, let's say within the last year or so, that I'll create like a reel of something like a weekend trip or different like little videos that kind of got me back into like, okay, how can I do that? And I was doing that with Instagram. So that's really like the tool that I normally use to put the videos together, at least that I know how to use right now. And I would say along with that, like I said, I always really nerd out over this stuff, not to repeat myself, but it's like, it's definitely, I think, to a whole new level. I think when I moved to Spain, there were times when I first moved here, like I would catch myself just talking to myself in Spanish or like whispering to myself in Spanish on the street to like, I don't know, to put sentences together, like new phrases I heard and stuff like that. And I just find it so cool and so fun. So knowing all of that, the videos, the finding these phrases, new vocabulary to be so fun and like making my ideas more concrete, I'd kind of considered this video idea, maybe I can start to do this and put these into some sort of material or some sort of content, as people call it. And actually also my boyfriend, who I have talked to about like these different things, and I always nerd out over English with him. He's Italian, so he's also like we speak in English, but he's not a native English speaker. He speaks great English. But we've talked about those sorts of things, and he also kind of encouraged me to start doing that, to start into the video journey. And I was like, maybe I should go for it. And I actually started on YouTube first and was making horizontal, or people call it like long form content on YouTube. But it was pretty short, long form content. And then I also started making some shorts on YouTube, since that's like a new feature that YouTube has, which are like the vertical videos, right?
Yeah.
The shorter ones. And I had told a few people, hey, I'm making these videos. I told a couple of students that I've had too, I'm making these videos. If they're helpful for you, you can check them out. And a couple of students and a few different friends too told me, hey, Annie, you should also post them on TikTok. Like on TikTok, you can really, your videos can grow a lot faster. A lot of people, they hit the algorithm. I still don't even feel like I know exactly how that works, the whole algorithm thing. But some people told me that, and I thought, okay, if these people are telling me this, why not? Because I already had these vertical short form videos. So I started post them on TikTok and then on Instagram too, where you said you found me. So in terms of the short form videos that are vertical, I post those on all three of those different platforms. And it is through TikTok that I started, the following started to just really take off, specifically on TikTok. And like I said, I can't claim I know exactly how the algorithm works. But it's gone very well on TikTok, and it's been super interesting. I mean, I feel like at the very least I've improved, been able to improve since my first videos, kind of make them a little bit more easy to follow and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And when was your first post about?
Yeah, my first post would have been in November of last year.
Okay, so it's really not long ago at all. Like it was
Yeah,
really
not too
very
long ago.
recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, like five months ago.
Yeah, exactly. About 5 months ago. It's been pretty recent.
So
exactly.
basically overnight that's you know, as a 39-year-old man, that feels like it would be overnight. So
Yeah, more or less.
yeah, it's amazing. And now, you know, your following is, well, it's significant. We'll talk about the recent video that you posted, I think 6 days ago.
Yeah.
I've just put it on my computer there, so if anybody heard it over the microphone, the one all about the dot, or as you would call the period, I would call the full stop.
Yes.
Or the
Yes.
point.
Or point or decimal. Some
Yeah.
people pointed out. Yeah.
Yeah, and it exploded, didn't it? It
It did.
It went really well. And I remember, so I looked at your TikTok just about the day before that, and I was like, oh, she does have a
Yeah.
significant following. And then I looked at it again yesterday, and I was like, what happened this weekend? And it went up by about 21,000 people.
Yeah.
Over the weekend or something like that. It was.
That's right. Yeah.
Quite a lot. And yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely not super expected, but it was cool. Very cool to see. And something that, like I said, does not happen so much on Instagram or on YouTube, or at least doesn't happen so easily from what I am experiencing.
Yeah. So let's look a bit about your videos in particular, because they're a bit different. They're not the same as other videos. So you mentioned you talked to your boyfriend about these things, and that kind of came up. So what makes your videos different? Why are they different?
Oh, good question. I don't feel like I've watched quite as many teacher or teaching videos as maybe what you've watched like over time. I've definitely watched some with different approaches, and I've seen a few different creators that I've followed too who are native Spanish speakers, and then create videos kind of the same way, in a similar way that I do. So I guess what makes my videos a little bit different is that I'm explaining in all my videos basically everything in Spanish. All my explanation is in Spanish. And then I try to use different scenarios, maybe a little bit of acting sometimes, and then also text that I add to the videos in order to give examples and kind of represent how you can use the type of phrase or the vocabulary that I'm trying to teach in the video.
I really like the fact that, you know, it's not all one thing or another. So, you know, there's the one about the coffee vocabulary, but then you also have like phrases that are commonly confused. Yeah, like the cuánto tiempo one. You know, how much time?
Exactly.
I think the one that gets me the most is todos los días. Okay, when people are like,
yes,
all of the days. It's like,
all the days.
No,
Yeah.
it's not that one. That's not the answer.
Exactly. And coming, like, you know, we have both been in situations where we're learning a new language. A lot of people have been in those situations, and we all know how that feels, right? And so we know the feeling of okay, I say this in my first language, so I'm just going to try to translate it literally into my second language. And then sadly sometimes it doesn't work out
because you look as crazy as a goat if you do that.
Exactly. I mean, I've had many of those moments when I've been speaking in Spanish with Spanish speakers, you know, where maybe you get a funny look or something like that. And honestly, that's kind of another big focus of of my videos is a lot of the phrases that I'm teaching are phrases that you can't translate literally, and that's why I find them to be so fun. I mean, basically all the phrases, the specific phrases um, like, well, I'm thinking about doing one actually on like no tiene nada que ver, like it has nothing to do with that, or maybe like you said, cuánto tiempo, long time no see, things like that. When I learned those in Spanish, I was so excited. And like I remember all these moments, like the specific moment I remember when I learned no tiene nada que ver. I was on the metro reading a book in Spanish, and as I was reading, it was used in context, and I was like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what that means or what phrase that should be in English, and it's not translated literally. But all these phrases that can be used in kind of everyday scenarios are, obviously super useful. So since I found that so fun to learn in Spanish, I like to kind of flip it around and be able to teach them in English.
I do
Yeah.
like that idea, but it's not only those phrases that you use. Obviously, you do also,
Right.
teach other things as well, like pronunciation and
Yes.
things that I imagine you've noticed a lot more now you're teaching adults than when you were teaching kids. Like, these fossilized errors, like the L's in modal verbs.
Yeah.
I've
Yes.
seen that video. I like that video. Things like that are so important for students to have. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that if you want to learn another language, the best thing to do is just only use microlearning and TikTok.
Right.
Don't get me, but as an added tool, as something extra, it's such a useful thing to have, because you don't necessarily have those moments in the classroom. You may have the L's in should, would, could, and so on. But are you going to remember that like 3 years later? Or, you learned that when you were 17. But if you've got it on a 30, 40-second video, it's like, oh, I can do that in 30 or 40 seconds, obviously.
Yes.
But just having it there in front of you, just this really short burst of something.
Exactly. That's how I feel about it. And like you said, I feel like some of the inspiration does come from my students, whether they're private students or at the academy. Things that I see there that can be useful, maybe are common mistakes, common words that are confused, like you said, could, would, should, the pronunciation of those. Or I recently did one about college versus colleague. I hear that one definitely with adults, and those are very common words that they're going to use, so we might go over it in class, but I like to think that they'd be either good new information or good reminders for yes, mostly an adult population.
Yeah,
and I think
certainly teens as well. A lot of them, it's
yeah,
really useful for teens. The colleague
certainly.
and college one, like, they'll have the word in front. They'll have the word colleague, and it's college to them because it starts COLL, so it must be college. I know that word, so it must be that one.
Exactly.
I just teach co-worker because colleague's too hard for me to spell. It's like, oh, what are those vowels doing at the end of that word? Oh, co-worker, that's fine.
Yes, I know. I should start to teach that one too. That's actually a good idea. Co-worker. They always want to literally translate colega, and then that's what,
my mates. It's my mates here. My mates as well. Like your classmates. What kind of mates are you talking about?
Yeah. Exactly.
So
it's always.
I really like as well, like, a lot of your video. I mean, they do vary. It's not always the same format, but I like that they're not highly edited. So yes, you have the vocab on there and stuff like that, but and yes, there are the kind of acting ones where you do a bit of cutting here and there and everywhere. But a lot of them, it's you and a camera. It's you speaking to the camera, and it's not. I know with a lot of content creators, they'll have a 2-3 minute video that they'll spend 4 or 5 hours on. I can't deal with that, which is why I do live radio, because that means I don't have to edit anything.
Yeah. The editing can definitely take some time.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Especially when you're putting the words in and you've had to point at the right
Mhm.
moment and stuff like that. It's quite annoying when you see somebody and they put the point in and the word comes a few seconds later or like half a
Yeah.
second later. It's like, oh, come on.
I'm such a perfectionist about that. Yeah, which makes me take a little extra time, but it's worth it, I think. Yeah. So agreed.
I just noticed your CH pronunciation one as well.
Mhm.
I was doing a session the other day, which is called Strip, which is one of the first sessions I ever did, which is all about pronunciation.
Mhm.
And the last thing in the whole part is all about CH pronunciations. It's called
Mm.
a curious approach to the chaos of ch.
Oh my gosh.
In there.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good one.
And then of course there's choir, which
Choir.
just throws
You know,
everything out the window.
yes, interestingly enough, I don't know if you've experienced this too, but Europeans in general that I've talked to, I would say, especially Europeans, I guess, from Spain and Italy specifically, have they a lot of them have not known that word when I've mentioned it to them. Choir.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that? Like that
Yeah.
word specifically is the one that I've noticed that it's like they don't recognize it. I find it so interesting.
It might be because of the sound. I mean, because that
Maybe.
qu sound never ever happens. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's literally the only
Exactly.
word that does it.
Exactly.
Which
Super
very
interesting.
yeah.
Maybe they know the word chorus too.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
because coro in
exactly.
Spanish they maybe translate it that way.
Exactly.
So of your videos,
Mhm.
which one was your favorite to make?
Oh, favorite to make. Well, I do feel like the one that you were talking about with the punto, the period, dot, full stop, as you would say, all of those words. That was interesting to make. And I had the idea, and it kind of I forgot about it for a little bit, and then the idea came back to me because I talk about it in class every now and then. Um, and I was like, wow, this one, I feel like it's interesting, and I feel like it'll be useful, and other people find it interesting too, just because of the fact that, as far as I know, there's just one word for it in Spanish. Um,
Yeah.
that was how it was received. That it was very interesting. To a lot of the people who watched it, that one definitely got, quite a lot of views. And I'm pulling it up right now. I got a lot of different comments coming kind of from different angles.
Yeah.
About, in Spanish, there's just one word for it, like why do English speakers complicate things so much and things like that.
I didn't invent the language.
Yeah, exactly. Like sometimes I do get, some interesting comments that are maybe one could perceive them as critical, and I'm like, if I could change some of these things, I would, but I simply can't. So I'm just trying to like let you guys know,
Yeah.
Um, but I think that one was fun to make because also that it was different. Many times I'll have text or words or phrases that I'm showing that I add to the video, but that, a lot of it was based on just a single dot.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with dots. There are those different uses for it, and it is so often, you'll ask a student their email address, and they'll be like, "It's Juan arroba." How do you say arroba? That's
Yeah.
at arroba Gmail. No, that's Gmail. Punto dot.
Yeah.
And every single like that one for me is the .com is the one that's, I don't know, anyone who's kind of over 25, 26 will remember the .com boom or whatever, but
Yes.
anyone younger than that is just like .com. What's that? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Nobody even knows that, because that's not the only dot that we have now. There's .live,
Mhm.
whatever. So
Yeah,
that's a really
exactly.
big one. I was wondering if you'd ever thought about the number 0, and how many different uses there are for that, particularly in English. We've got
Ooh.
0, we say O when we're using phone numbers. There's naught that we say. There's nil that we say in football when it's 0-0, because when Spanish people talk about football, they say 0-0, but it's actually 0-0 in English. So
that's one that I wouldn't particularly say, or that I haven't heard so much. Nil. Interesting.
Well, there you go.
But yeah, that's an idea. I'm writing that down right now.
And if you're Scottish, you might even say 0-all, but not many
No
people
way,
would say
really?
that. Yeah, 0-all. Yeah, because 1-1 is 1-all. So yeah, I don't know. That's just an
I
idea.
think one slang we have. I don't know if you would say this slang, but I would say goose eggs sometimes.
Goose
Goose
eggs.
eggs. Sometimes people
What
say
does
that.
what does
I
that
think
mean?
like goose eggs, like 00.
Okay. I was like,
Yeah,
hang on a minute. What are you talking?
00.
Goose
Yeah,
eggs? What?
goose eggs.
Okay, that makes
Hopefully,
sense. Yeah.
I think I'm using that right. Hopefully, I might have to double check that one, but yeah. So
Sports
that's
vocab. There you go. You could dress up like a sports and just do a sports vocab.
exactly.
That could be fun.
Exactly.
I think the
Yeah.
first one I ever saw you do was the coffee vocab.
Yeah.
That one was that one that
Yeah.
I've noticed now because I've seeing it on TikTok. That one also did really well. That one
Yeah.
went down really well as well.
It did. Yes. Yeah.
So yeah,
Thank you.
were you thinking of any others like coffee vocab or I don't know eating out vocab or I know you've got the I
Yeah.
want to invite you one which is
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that one comes up a lot.
yeah
Yeah, I've definitely thought about trying to incorporate more context, being outside. I think it's always good for whoever's watching the videos or students to see these things in context as much as they can. That's why I didn't necessarily think that the coffee vocabulary one would be like that interesting. Like, I thought it was interesting, good things for people to know, like the word lid, um, cup, things like that for a to-go coffee, as I would say, to-go coffee. Um, but people seem to find that super, super useful.
yeah
I had a lot of people commenting on that one. Um, that like I asked them how to say the word tapa, which is lid, and a lot of people commented that when I said tapa, they thought it was tape.
uh, yeah
I
well
was
my daughter used to say I need to tap this and so no you need to
like,
cover it tapar so yeah I need to tap it
exactly.
it's quite funny with my seeing as my daughter's 9 now so she doesn't make the same mistakes anymore but I remember once we were in IKEA and there was 3 chocolate samples over at the side and and my daughter walked over and said chocolate libre and it's like well it's kind of cute just imagine it running along the wilds now that the difference between libre and gratis in Spanish is the
Yeah.
difference between free and free now one of them is like freedom the other one is not having to pay for it and what my daughter said for anyone who doesn't speak Spanish was that the chocolate was free it had freedom so I was imagining it
Yes.
running across the plains of Africa chocolate libre
Exactly.
or just busting out of jail with a new prison tat on just like
Yeah.
I'm free now so
Free
yeah
chocolate.
that I
Hashtag
found
free
quite
chocolate.
funny
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and I mean, it's like those little things, those little differences that you might not catch, or like the things that you can't translate literally. It's like they're infinite,
yeah
and it's so interesting because you don't realize how infinite they are until I don't know, you start to make videos or
yeah
content or something like that, and you're like, wow,
save and
it's
save is another one of course so talk
what was
about
it? Sorry.
save like ahorrar or guardar
Mhm.
like the
Yeah.
different different things there
Yes.
so there's so many and yeah
Exactly.
it was great it's great for me watching Alicia my daughter grow up and seeing them which is when I saw your video it kind of transported me like to that as well
Hmm.
and it just I don't know
So
they're
cool.
they're short and simple and it seems like I don't know very easily digestible which I guess is the whole point in micro learning
Hmm. Yeah.
so how would you describe yourself now what would you call yourself so I've got the title obviously on the artwork I've showed you but
Right.
you're an English teacher you're are you a TikTok teacher what are you I don't even know do you even know
Oh my gosh, I don't know if I even know. That's a good question. I haven't thought through that too much. I mean, I guess TikTok teacher could be a good way to put it. TikTok teacher, or like I almost want to say like TikTok English helper. I mean, I don't think that's much of a title,
I like
but
that
that's part of like what I feel like I'm trying to do. Kind of like we were talking about before. It's like there are things that don't make sense in English. There are things that are just they make the language harder. They're not super logical. And if I could change them, I would. But I feel like I'm trying to like help or kind of just like serve them up some of this information on a silver platter so that I can help them to know maybe to avoid an awkward moment or try to use a phrase literally when that's not possible and that kind of thing. I mean, actually on TikTok, I think the last I saw, the third highest country in terms of viewers is the United States. So there are a lot of people viewing from the United States, which means that at least they're going to be in contexts where they really want to use this and these words, these phrases, and they want to use them well. So I feel like hopefully I'm able to help in those situations.
I definitely think so. With all of this, the approach that you're taking, I imagine it's quite different to the traditional approach to language teaching. So I imagine when you're in the classroom, you don't walk in there and do the whole class in Spanish and throw in a couple of English words. I mean, I imagine it's a different approach. So this is one of the I wouldn't necessarily call it a hot topic, but it's a forever debated topic in ELT
Yes.
or ENL or EAL or ELL, all of those. The use of a learner's first language. How do you feel about that? I mean, obviously, in your videos, you feel great about it, but in general, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, great question. That's definitely a loaded question because, yes, I would agree. This is definitely a debated topic. As you said, I think in my videos, I find it very useful because, like you said, it makes things pretty easily digestible, at least for the Spanish-speaking population that I'm trying to reach and trying to help out. If we're thinking more generally, or if we're thinking in a classroom setting, I definitely try to lower that. Like you just said, I'm not going to walk in and say buenos dias, in my morning class.
It's probably
exactly. Like, they're probably, I mean, I don't necessarily want to do that. My students are probably not going to want that either. And I know that there are teachers, there are people who think that the L1 just basically in general should not enter the classroom. I can see why people have that perspective. I do, honestly, I understand that approach. I'm in a moment, at least right now, where I don't feel like I completely have that perspective. I feel like the L1, a student's first language can be used effectively in a classroom. I don't know if I want to go as far as to say should be used. I mean, I think that's kind of up to each teacher. But it was interesting. I think it was soon after I started at the academy that I'm working at now. I remembered another teacher who said, we were kind of talking about this a little bit, the L1, the use of the first language in the classroom, and she said, I just think, honestly, it's absurd to pretend that students aren't already speakers of a language coming into the classroom. And I was like, that's an interesting idea. It's a very interesting idea. Because I think that there are some times that maybe you can try to explain something that's a little bit complex in English, such as if we're talking about the second conditional, the third conditional, certain phrasal verbs and things like that. You could try to explain it in English, and honestly, most of the time I do. I give lots of examples in English, things like that. But I do sometimes think it's useful to maybe translate a phrasal verb that you're trying to teach into Spanish. Let's say just with a phrasal verb, for example. That's at least my own perspective right now. I try not to necessarily do that from like a lazy approach. I think of it more as like a usefulness approach. I mean, one thing I think part of the debate is that can save a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of my students, at least at the academy and my private students and everything, they're trying to learn, relatively fast. So that doesn't mean we need to speed through everything. That doesn't mean that we should translate everything into Spanish. But I think part of the whole debate or part of the whole concept is trying to use your discretion as a teacher to decide, is this possibly going to be more effective if I use a little bit of Spanish in this moment?
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like if I'm thinking about the phrasal verb to get over, right? I had recently taught this one. I could explain for 10 minutes. Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
Um,
I've mastered the art of silent sneezing.
Nice. I have not. I'm the opposite, sadly.
Usually no, but on the radio, it tends to help.
Oh, I just exposed you then. I'm so sorry.
Outrageous.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I was recently talking about the phrasal verb get over. If you're not a native speaker of English, this is an extremely not literal phrase. So I could spend 10 minutes giving, 10 different examples of when I could use get over. And then hopefully, or maybe the students that I'm with at that time would get the meaning, be able to use it well. And I think that's very possible. And it's not to say that that's the wrong thing to do. I don't think that that's the wrong thing to do. But if I feel like if I try to explain it a little bit in English, maybe give a few examples, if I still see confused looks, I might say superar. And then it's like there's this big sigh of relief between all of the students. And it's not like that means they're going to start turning to each other and talking to each other in Spanish or, translating word for word everything that we're saying. But I feel like in some of those moments when there's that big sigh of relief from those students, it feels pretty useful because now it's like they've had millions of situations where they've used the verb superar when they're speaking in Spanish in their life. And they can now use that to use this verb or use this new term in English.
There are some things as well that translate really easily. And as you mentioned, it depends so much on the situation, but like used to, solia, like it's just, you've got that in one of your videos as well. It's just so, and the second conditional as well, it pretty much translates, and comparatives pretty much translate. So, I'm not saying go into the classroom and just translate things, but I think the key, obviously, it depends on the situation. It depends on who you're teaching. It depends on all sorts of different things. But for me, the thing that's really missing is training on how to use an L1 in the classroom. So we always leave it up to a teacher's discretion. If you can't speak any Spanish, then you're not going to do it anyway. So your class is going to be only English. But I think my teaching improved a lot when I finally learned Spanish. I haven't learned Spanish. I'm still learning Spanish, obviously. But when I, kind of began to dominate the language, as you might say in Spanish.
Exactly.
Dominar.
Yes.
How would you say that in English?
In English?
Because you don't dominate the language.
Master, kind of?
Master, there you go. As I started, I don't feel not quite mastery, but when I started to be able to use it properly, it helped me a lot. But also, in the school I was working in back in 2016, the policy was that me as a foreign teacher, I used to have hair then. I was dreadfully handsome. But I was this foreign guy who they would put up on stage, and there is the giddy, the English guy. We've got this guy. He's here, and he speaks English. He's a native speaker, so he's amazing. But I was supposed to not know any Spanish, and I was just like, hang on a minute. I've lived in this country at the time for 7 years. If I'm going into a classroom telling them they need to learn English, but I haven't learned Spanish, what kind of a role model is that? You don't want to have them thinking that you can't speak Spanish. Fine, they can know you speak Spanish, but that you're not just going to use it, whenever, because I can't really be bothered to teach you properly today. So, pues vamos a hablar un poquito en español y está bien. No, that's not how it works. It's all about learning when to use it and how to use it. So, in our training courses, in our ENL certificate learners training course, it should
Yeah.
have how to use an L1. I mean, it's different if you're teaching in a multilingual situation. There are translanguaging opportunities, but I think it's silly to completely discount these things, this language that somebody has. They've got the connections in their brain there, so why not connect them to other words? I really like to, like, my Spanish, the way when I realized I had dominated it, was I was actually standing in the shower one day thinking about a conversation I was going to have with my nan when I got back to the UK, and I was thinking about it in Spanish, and I was like, that's cool. Like, I don't dream in Spanish, but like I had this realization that I was doing this monologue in Spanish. But
wow,
so
that's awesome.
Like, students need to know that they've got this language and they can use it to help them in learning another language. So
yes, absolutely. And going back to I agree with everything you just said, and going back to what you said about the whole notion of standing up in front of them with them thinking that you're a Agiri that has not made any effort to learn Spanish, speak any Spanish. It's like that is kind of like a separating factor. And I do think that something that's potentially, undervalued with using a little bit of L1 is building some rapport and kind of a good atmosphere and a relationship with your students. Not that, once again, not that you can't build a good rapport without using any Spanish. Of course you can do that. But I think for me, coming from a place of knowing how it feels, living here for a while, to try to be learning Spanish, speaking Spanish, improving my Spanish. Like, language, I think, is a super, psychological thing. It's super psychological and super social. At least that's what I feel and what I talk about with my students. And many times, if you feel like there's pressure in a situation, you feel nervous, you feel less comfortable with the person, you're going to bloquear, or like how
gonna get blocked. Block
get
up.
blocked.
You're gonna
Just
trying to
it's not going to come
translate.
out so well.
Exactly.
Because, the language
The
that you're trying
cat
to
will get your tongue.
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that one. Exactly. And that's what I've experienced in Spanish. And I've noticed consciously that in social situations or maybe classroom situations too, I feel significantly more comfortable if I know that that person has any sense of understanding of how it feels to learn a language. And that's not to say that everyone has the opportunity to learn a language or that everyone should do that. But if you're able to display that you have gone through that process at least a little bit, potentially by whether that's using Spanish in the classroom a little bit or talking about your experiences learning some type of language, I always see students' faces light up if I talk about that or use a bit of Spanish or maybe say something in Spanish wrong. I mean, that happens sometimes.
Oh, they love that.
Yeah, exactly.
They love the chance to teach you.
Exactly. They have the chance to teach you. They might give a little giggle or something like that. And I feel like that can go so far in how you feel in these conversations with your students. I mean, I've noticed that in group classes and private classes, and all those sorts of things. And if I go back to the TikTok world for a second too, I think that can open up the room for a little bit of conversation in the comments on some of these videos, whether that's TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. There are a lot of students or people, I should say, who ask me things in Spanish. And then, if they ask me in English, I'll reply in English generally, or if they ask me in Spanish, I'll reply in Spanish. And it's like, it breaks down this whole wall of like, okay, maybe this is someone who's just beginning to learn English. Like, it's just beginning to be something interesting for them or something they would use. They couldn't ask in English, or they wouldn't feel comfortable, let's say. And then, the whole wall is gone. So
yeah. Also, on that rapport thing, if you say some slang in Spanish, they love it. They absolutely love it. Like, particularly here in Andalusia, there's a lot of typical phrases like mi alma and stuff like that. If you say that in class, then they're just like, what? They often talk about, so when they hear me speaking in Spanish, they're like, oh, well, you've got a real Andalusian accent. And I'm like, it's Girilu. Like, it's Giri and Andalu. And they're like, they love that. Like suddenly they're like, oh, he's laughing at himself, which is important.
No, that is funny.
So,
I noticed your Andalusian accent. That's pretty cool.
thank you. I've been here
That's
12 years, so it's taken a while.
okay. Yeah, makes
Um,
sense.
yeah. So we're wrapping up now. We're coming towards the end of this. I could probably go on quite a while. As I mentioned, the sound of my own voice and all that stuff. But anyway, do you have any tips for somebody who would like to start becoming a TikTok teacher or a TikTok English helper or somebody who helps with English via the medium of TikTok? That one isn't going to work.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Good question. I would say a couple things that I've kind of noticed or realized in the process. One would be something that you kind of said before is to try to make the videos, especially if you're doing short form content, where like the person probably wants to watch it once and get it, not necessarily pause and like think super hard. Try to make it pretty easily digestible. I feel like adding text, I mean that's what I do generally with all my videos, adding text and then trying to draw attention to the text that is most important in that scenario. That's a good way to make it pretty easily digestible. Or, for a more specific example, if I'm writing out a couple of sentences or one sentence, but there's one new phrase that we just learned in the video that's in the sentence, sometimes I make that a different color. And I think those small things, along with adding sounds, adding little effects and things like that, like you said, not necessarily over editing or spending all day having to edit one little video, but trying to draw attention to the important things. I think that is super, it makes it more digestible and more interesting for whoever's watching. So I would say that would be one big tip that I would say. As well as, this is kind of more of a general thing. I'm not sure exactly how helpful this will be. Do with it what you will, but I've seen different things online or in other content creators' videos, not necessarily language teachers, but people emphasize to make it things authentic to you. And I think that can be very important because I think probably for me, whether I realize it or not, or if you're creating your videos and whether you realize it or not, you're going to have that little sparkle or more passion, more energy potentially in your video if this is something that you find interesting, something that you have at least, a little bit of passion about. Like when I taught, for example, in a video, I taught the phrase, as far as I know, which in Spanish is que yo sepa. And when I learned the phrase, I just learned that probably a couple months ago, like when my roommate said it, I was like, oh my gosh, wow, now I know how to say that. And I was so excited about it. And I think, the phrases or the words, whatever you're teaching, that you put in the videos, if you feel something about that and it's a little bit more authentic, I think that can go a long way too.
Amazing. Yeah, I do need to. I'm trying to find time to make more video content, but at the moment I've got too much other things. But when the new series of Renewable English starts on the 21st of April, by the way, which will be 16 days after people hear this, I will be making more regular videos, I imagine. Well, that is about that for today. So thank you so much for coming along. But before we go, we've talked a lot about you being on TikTok and YouTube and so on. I will put in the description box how people can find you with your handles. But why don't you tell us just quickly now before we go, what are your handles and where can we find you?
Oh, sure. Okay. Let's see. So on TikTok, I am Annie Bruggs. That's ANNIEBRUGGS, Annie Bruggs. And the title of my account is Inglés with Annie. I think if you search Inglés with Annie on really any of the platforms, you'll find me. On Instagram, my handle is Inglés_with_Annie. YouTube, I think technically what I'd have to do is post a link, but you could search English with Annie and probably find me there as well on YouTube.
Well, there you go. So
That's
if you're looking for Annie, look for Inglés with Annie, and you will find her. Annie, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for
Thank you so
giving
much
us your
too.
time.
It was great talking with you. Thank you very much.
Likewise, and well, I'll see you very soon on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube.
Yes, exactly. And I'll see you as well, it sounds like, on there. So
Fantastic. See you
thank
later.
you. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides, and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
So there we have it. There we had it. Annie herself of Inglés with Annie was here in the studio. She's currently in the classroom teaching people Inglés with her, I guess. Um, so at the end of the day, what she was talking about, one of the big points that she mentioned, and something I hear a lot about when people talk about social media and content, and that's to be authentic and to be yourself. I'm not exactly sure how to not be myself. I'm not sure I could do that. But remaining authentic to yourself within your content is super important. And to make sure you feel something about what you are talking about what you are teaching about, something that you care about, and it isn't just for the likes or to please the algorithm. Although that said, quite a lot of content out there is just algorithm pleasing nonsense, but you know, people like to watch that kind of thing on TikTok, I guess. I'm still not great with TikTok. I try and find the time to get around all other social media, but at the moment, it's just wave after wave of all sorts of other things. Classroom work, planning, of course. We're all pretty aware of that. And then materials to create a new series that's planned and ready to go, but still needs bits and pieces done to it. So yeah, it does of course get a bit overwhelming. So it's sometimes nice to jump on there and just watch some mind-numbing nonsense. Um, but of course, it's much better to not just numb our minds, but maybe find something important and interesting to fill our minds with. She also mentioned about being digestible. So not just lots of super complex things on there. Now I know in uh, a huge area of my work, a lot of the vocabulary that I teach, a lot of what we talk about in terms of sustainability can be awfully complex, and particularly for a second language learner can sometimes seem that maybe they'd rather be learning the third conditional than talking about the climate being a commons or talking about carbon sequestration. However, those things are important uh, to the language, but you can also harness English through sustainability and vice versa. And I really like what Annie does with her videos. She mentions there are other content creators out there who speak in Spanish and then give the rough translation in English, but they are usually Spanish speakers with an L1. She's doing it as an English speaker, using Spanish as the medium to teach English in her videos. But as you heard, she did say she doesn't really do that all that much in the classroom, but she does use it as a way of uh, enganchar is a word that she could probably do to get people hooked. She uses it as a hook to make sure people do get what they need in that very short space of time. In those 35 seconds, they can get absolutely everything they need. Um, so we are coming rapidly to an end of the show, and for me, this was a really good learning curve, a really interesting one to learn all about how Annie has gone from naught to 80,000 followers in such a short time, and she mentions it as it is that authenticity. I think again, finding the time to create these videos is something very difficult for all of us as teachers. Um, because we do have so much on our plate at the moment, and so little time to get around anything else. So if you've enjoyed the show, please do jump onto your podcast provider and give us a review. Remember, there are loads of other shows you can tune into, of course, and you can also jump onto ttradio.org/listen back if you want to. Get ready for this. Listen back to any of the previous shows that we've had, not just the Wednesday Twilight show with Harry, but of course, there are about 70 something shows that you can delve into and listen back to those. But there are so many other shows with all sorts of different areas of teaching to listen to. So please do get in there, have a listen, and do feel free to give us a review, but make sure it's a nice one. I kid, of course. Say whatever you feel. This is a free-ish world where we are free to say what we need and what we want. I will be back next week with a surprise guest, so do come along, do join us. As you know, I did a bit of humble bragging on social media earlier. I'm not in my regular studio in my office in Seville. I'm actually in Portugal, in Portimao, which is a couple of hours from where I live. My wife surprised me this morning and said, "We're getting out of the city. We're going somewhere else today." So there is about 45 minutes left of the sun. So I'm going to go and throw myself into the ocean, probably get very cold and run out of the ocean quickly. But it has been wonderful speaking to you all. I can't wait to hear you next week. In the meantime, have a lovely weekend, have a lovely rest of the week, and I'll speak to you soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.